Well, it's the second to the last Sunday in the series we've been doing about empathy, based on the book, The War for Kindness, Building Empathy in a Fractured World, written by Jamil Zaki. Chapter 3 in the book is entitled Hatred versus Contact, and it tells the story of Tony McAleer, who was one of the leaders of the White Aryan Resistance movement out of Vancouver, Canada. There he is, back in his white supremacist skinhead days, I guess you'd say. His is a story of transformation and redemption, a lot like Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, except it's nonfiction. This really happened. And I love these kind of stories, because I guess I need the reassurance that positive change is still possible, even when someone appears to be incapable of change or transformation. The reason people like Charles Dickens wrote stories like A Christmas Carol is because they're based on real life counterparts. Most fiction is based on fact, and the stories are simply variations on a theme that we might find inspiring, comforting, and, yes, entertaining. That's all right too. The stories themselves can help to create some of those new cultural norms that we talked about last week, you might remember. For example, when the book A Christmas Carol came out in 1843, it changed the way people celebrated Christmas. It also changed attitudes about how society should treat people who were poor or in debt. And a great example of how that can happen from this country is a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This was published in 1852. It sold over 300,000 copies in the North alone after it came out. And the book caused this huge uproar because it made people aware of the true horrors of slavery, and it supercharged the abolitionist movement. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, and he was reported to have said, "So this is the little lady who started this great war." It's not a direct quote. There's some dispute on it, perhaps a little exaggerated, but not by much. Uncle Tom's Cabin, fiction based on fact that changed cultural norms in the North from being essentially ambivalent about slavery to firmly opposing slavery in less than 10 years. Stories are powerful, and in the hands of a talented storyteller, they can shape history. They can also shape and build empathy, which is what the story of Tony McAleer illustrates in our book. This is a guy who admits to being part of a group in Vancouver that saw a gay man in a park and chased him into a dark alley and then stood there throwing stones at him. He admits to have been part of a gang that vandalized a synagogue. And he goes on to become the founder of something called the Canadian Liberty Net, which offered an automated phone service where you could get your hate speech for the day, which targeted Jews, Canadian Indians, black people. Isn't it interesting how many organizations of that type use the word liberty? So for Tony, the transformation started when he found himself a single father of two. So his own childhood, as you might guess, had been horrible. And he vowed that things would be different for his own children. You know, there's significant evidence that people who become part of these kind of hate groups were physically or sexually abused as children or severely neglected. So the other thing that happened with Tony was that he realized that if he's going to raise two kids on his own, he needed a good paying job. Nobody wants a swastika-wearing skinhead as the public face of their business, right? So he decides he's going to take his racism underground, so to speak. He's going to, cover up his tattoos, whatever it takes, so that he would appear to be more conventional so that he could compete in the job market. I mean, he had to have known, there had to have been some serious cognitive dissonance going on where he realizes that if he's going to move about in society and be successful, he had to somehow cover up these tendencies of his. The other thing that he started doing was he started taking classes to, enhance his resume. And one of the classes he took was a leadership class taught by a guy named Dove Barron. They had a connection. Because they were both originally from the UK and they both loved the Monty Python comedy troupe. I mean, who doesn't, right? So they became good friends, and one day Tony decided to come clean and told him all about his skinhead past. And when he did, Dove says, "You know I'm Jewish, right?" Now I think maybe the name Dove Barron might have been a good clue, but for whatever reason, Tony hadn't tuned into it yet. And when he realized that his good friend was Jewish, and he just told him that he used to be a skinhead, he was mortified. He was embarrassed, and he was apologetic. And Dove simply said to him, "That's what you did, but not who you are. I see you." That was Tony McAleer's first actual contact with a person who used to be the enemy. And that contact changed him. So he started telling gay people about what he had done all those years ago in a dark alley in Vancouver. He confessed to vandalizing the synagogue. And while people didn't minimize or let him off the hook for what he'd done, many of them were willing to engage him and to look past his actions. So Tony became involved in an organization called Life After Hate. This is their website. Life After Hate. It all starts with compassion, founded by former extremists who are committed to helping people leave the violent far right to connect with humanity and lead compassionate lives. And his story, his life story, is also found at something that's called the Forgiveness Project. And this is all about storytelling. The Forgiveness Project is about the transformational power of storytelling in situations like this. In the book, the author writes, "Hatred buries empathy, but does not kill it." Tony's conversion highlights a powerful way to get it back. Stories, that's one way. Stories can help to accomplish two very important things when it comes to empathy. First, stories can help people believe in the possibility of change, something I mentioned before. How could someone as radical, extreme, and damaged as Tony McAleer not only turn his life around, but become a powerful force for helping others do the same? Find out how it happened. Read his story. Read other people's stories who went through the same thing. Now, the other thing that stories can help with is to stimulate the imagination. In the book, Jamil writes that research shows that people who can vividly imagine their future self, behave more wisely. How about vividly imagining a future society? What would that look like? What would a world that works for all actually look like? What would be different? What specifically would be different? Another quote from the book. He says, "People who imagine a stronger, more connected version of their tribe might be inspired to make it a reality." Imagination. That's one of the 12 powers that we talk about in Unity. And it could be another tool for helping people to thrive in a changing world and turning that change into something that we want as opposed to something that we might try to avoid. So real life stories like Tony are very important. Real life experiences can build empathy, and so can stories and experiences that we make up. Neuroscientists talk about something that they call untethering. Untethering, as in casting off a rope and letting a boat go drifting, or setting a hot air balloon loose to ride the winds. Untethering. And the brain can do the same thing. So here's something that everyone is going to be very happy to hear. All right? As it turns out, sitting around is one of our most important jobs. There you go. Sitting around is one of our most important jobs. Idle hands find trouble, but idle brains are free to daydream, planning ahead, reminiscing, and imagining. These same parts of the brain also play a crucial role in empathy. This makes sense because empathy is a kind of untethering. When you imagine what your mom thought of the last email you sent her, or what victims of a recent mass shooting might be feeling, you're taking a mental trip into their world. The more you engage the brain's untethering system, the deeper you can go, and the better you understand what other people think or feel. That's good news. And the even better news is that it works even when those people are made up, works of pure fiction. Untethering is at the very heart of storytelling. He says, since people first cozied up around a fire together, we've told stories. First out loud, now on paper and screens. Surrounded by real people, we spend much of our free time pretending that people who never existed experience things that never happened. And it works. It has a practical application. Now, back in 1990, there were these two friends. One was an English professor, and the other was a criminal court judge. And they devised an interesting experiment. The judge was frustrated and tired of seeing the same people committing the same crimes over and over again and appearing in front of him in the same courtroom over and over again. The English professor was frustrated by the fact that universities seemed to be cutting funding to the humanities and the arts, especially literature departments, in favor of engineering and science, despite the fact that he saw his students being transformed every single semester by the stories and the great literature that they were being exposed to. So they were both frustrated, and their mutual discontent resulted in a program where the judge would select people from his courtroom, and they would receive shorter sentences. They were carefully selected with the help of a probation officer and so on. They would get a shorter sentence, but only if they participated in a reading group that was led by the English professor. So the group would meet every 2 weeks at the University of Massachusetts, where they would all read and discuss classic literature. And it turned into a program that is now called Changing Lives Through Literature. And I don't know if it's been tried yet, but I suspect that you could do the same thing with classic movies or maybe even select television dramas. I think that would work as well. But for now, the experience of immersing yourself in literature is what's been working. And what they're finding is that the people who participate in Changing Lives had a significantly lower rate of doing a repeat crime, and those who did a repeat crime were less likely to engage in a violent crime. The tendency for a criminal to do it again is called recidivism. And the recidivism rate for offenders in the Changing Lives program was less than 20%, compared to 45% outside the program. So that's a pretty significant difference. And the program obviously is far more effective than having to house and feed someone in jail. The reason it works is because literature and drama require us to experience the world from a different perspective. And then once we complete the story, we can't help but try to compare it to our own life story and experience. It's a great tool for enhancing self-awareness and bringing about reflection. And it also encourages empathy because it invites us to consider what the characters are experiencing and why. So according to the book, the bottom line is this. He says, evidence is now flooding in. Art, especially in narrative forms such as literature and drama, helps us untether. It makes empathy safer and more enjoyable, even in the hardest circumstances. Storytelling is among our oldest pastimes, and, as it turns out, one of our most essential. And so we keep hearing about funding for the arts is being consistently cut across the board. It seems like we're becoming increasingly obsessed with the bottom line and profit, which places the dramatic arts and literature at the margins. And this is especially true in our schools. So let's do what we can to keep the arts from being run out of our schools, whatever that might be. Get to know your candidates for the school board. Find out what their positions are on those issues. That's where it starts at those grassroots levels. Maybe there's some kind of a ballot measure that deals with those things. Get to know it. Do what we can to prevent them from booting the arts out of school, because there is more to life than the bottom line. And I hope we don't have to find out the hard way how true that really is. Because you know what the earth would be like without art, don't you? The earth without art is just That's right. So before we wrap things up for today, I mentioned last week that Unity World Headquarters was putting out something called the 7-Day Kindness Challenge. And if you're like most people, you may have asked yourself at least once, how can I make a difference in the world? Which sounds like a big task. So, for 1 week, the kindness team at Unity Headquarters wants to give us a break from thinking that we have to save the world. Instead of asking, how can I make a difference in the world, they invite us to consider how we can be more kind. The challenge starts tomorrow, February 17th. It's a 1-week email program. Once you sign up, you'll get an email, one a day for 7 days, that gives you an activity, a challenge, to help to shape your day and maybe someone else's day. We've put the link, it's in the bulletin, in the handout in your bulletin, which will take you to the sign-up page. Your email address, your first and last name is all they ask for. If you want to accept the challenge, and if you do accept the challenge, let us know next week how it goes. Just catch us and let us know you took it. Be interested to hear what the experience was like. And then next week we will be wrapping up our series on the War for Kindness, looking at what the future might bring when it comes to empathy. So have a kind week, and we will see you next time. Thank you.